In this video, we're going to learn how to use JSON to make our test data-driven. By making our test data-driven, it allows us to run the same test with multiple sets of data. You're watching Automate Now, and I'm Marco Cruz. Let's dive in. Okay, so here we go. Here we are on the sandbox page at Automate Now. The scenario that we're going to automate is this one. We're going to navigate to this page, then we're going to click on this form fields button. This is going to take us to this form right here where we have different fields. Here's an input field, some checkboxes, different items on here. And lastly, we put a message here and we click the submit button. So in the past, this is what we've done. Here we have a test that we wrote a while back, test enter text. And what we were doing then is creating a string here and saying the string is equal to hello. And this was the value that we would enter in this field here. This time, what I'm going to show you is how we can use a data provider to load this data in a different way. We're not going to be declaring the data that we want to enter. Because what happens is that, what if you have different scenarios, right? Let's say you want to run this test and you have different sets of data that you want to run it with. That's why we need data providers, because otherwise you're going to have to declare a bunch of different data on here on this test, and it's going to get it very messy and very disorganized. So let's see how we're going to do that. It is very common to use Excel sheets to store your data when you're doing data-driven testing. However, we're not going to be using Excel. Instead, we're going to use JSON. So here we're going to navigate to Maven or mvnrepository.com. And this is going to allow us to find the dependency that we're going to need for our tests. So here we're going to say JSON Simple. And this is the one that we need right here. This JSON Simple that's coming from Google. So we're going to click on this one here, and the latest version is 1.1.1 as of the date of recording. Let's click on this, and we're going to copy this information right here. Now we're going to back to our code, and we're going to go to our pom.xml file. And here we're going to need to add that dependency. So let's go ahead and add it down here. And next we're going to click this button to download that dependency. Now let's go back to the website for a minute. Here we have the different things that we need to do, right? There's the first item. We're going to need to put some information in this input field. Then we're going to check a box here, select the rated button, select something from this drop down, and then we're going to put in an email. And then lastly, we're going to put in a message and hit the submit button. So we're going to create a JSON file that is going to contain all of the information that we want to input into this form. To do that, we're going to go to our resources directory, right click it and say new file. And here we're going to call this file testdata.json. Hit enter. So I already have some data that I want to add to this file. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste it here. And this is what the JSON file is going to look like. Notice that this starts with an open brace and a closing brace. This is a simple JSON object. We have here the input field, which is kind of like the key on the left hand side. Then we have a semicolon in the middle, and this is the value. Okay, so the input field is coming from the website. So I've created a JSON object for this entire page. Here we have the input field, here we have a checkbox, the rated button. So every item that we're going to interact with in this form, I've labeled it here, and I put the data that we want to add. Okay, so for example, the input field will say the hello. The checkbox that we're going to select is going to be the first checkbox. The rated button that we're going to select is the one that says white. The dropdown will be binary, and so on. Here's the email and here's the text. So by the time we're done, all of that information will be entered in these fields here. And now comes the fun part. We're going to create a class that is going to contain the logic for reading this data from this JSON file. So we're going to go to this utilities package. I'm going to right click and say new Java class. We're going to call this class data_util and hit enter. Next, we're going to create a method in here that is going to read our data. So we're going to say public object. And here we're going to create an object array. We're going to see why in a second. And this is going to be called data provider 1. You can call it whatever you like. Now, this method here, data provider 1, is going to be the method that is going to provide the data to our test method that we're going to write later. So there's a keyword in test.ng or an annotation called data provider. So anytime that we write a data provider, we need to add this annotation here, data provider. And this data provider requires that we return an object of this type, an array. It could be one-dimensional or two-dimensional. Next, we're going to start working with that dependency that we added earlier, the JSON Simple dependency. And first, we need to say JSON parser. And notice that this is coming from JSON Simple, that parser. We're going to call this one parser equal to new JSON parser. Next, we're going to create a JSON object. Again, we import that from JSON Simple. We're going to call this one JSON object. And we're going to set this to null for now. These are the first two lines that we need to get started with this dependency. Next, let's go ahead and read the JSON file. And here we're going to use a try catch block because there are some exceptions that can occur when we're trying to read a file or to parse that JSON file. So we're going to say try, and here we're going to say object obj is equal to parser.parse. And then we need to add a file reader. So we're going to say new file reader, and we need to provide the location for this file that we want to read. Now the file that we want to read is this one here, the testdata.json. So let's go ahead and get the path for this file. We're going to right click it, and we're going to say copy path reference. When we click that, we get this submenu. We're going to select this one that says path from content root. And then we're going to paste that here. Okay, now once we added this file, let's go ahead and say enter JSON object is equal to obj. And what we're trying to do here is to store the parse data into this JSON object here. So we need to cast this into a JSON object type. Next, we're going to write the catch block. I'm going to say IO exception. And there's one other exception, parse exception. And here we're just going to say print stack trace. Again, these are the two types of exceptions that we can get. One is IO exception, where the file may not be located where we think it is, or parsing, there could be a parsing exception. Next, we're going to create an array that is going to store the JSON data. So here we're just going to say array to store JSON data. Remember that we need to return an array here. So that's the one that we're going to create here. And the size of this array will be 1. Next, we're going to store JSON data as key value pairs in a hash map. Let's go ahead and write the code for now, and then I'm going to explain it. So here we're going to say hash map. This will contain strings, so I'm going to say string, call it hash map, new linked hash map. Then we're going to put an if statement here, say JSON object, not null. And set. This set will contain the JSON object keys. And here we're going to use key set to retrieve all the keys. I'm getting an error here, so let me go ahead and import this. Then we're going to use an enhanced for loop here. String JSON object key. And here we're going to say hash map that put JSON object key will be the key, and the value will be JSON object that get JSON object key, and we need to cast this into a string. Then we're going to say else, going to say log that error in case we're not able to get that data. And we're going to throw an exception here. Runtime exception. The reason why we're getting an error here is because this log is coming from the base test class. So we need to extend it over here at the class level. Then we're going to come back here and we're going to store the hash map in an array and return that array. We say data at 0 is equal to hash map and return data. And that's all we need to do here. Okay, so let's run through what this code is doing. So again, we said that this is going to be the data provider. That's why we're using this annotation as data provider. A data provider needs to return this array here. So we're using the JSON Simple dependency. So here we create a JSON Simple, basically a JSON parser object, as well as a JSON object. Then we're going to read that data. Okay, we use the parser to read the data from the JSON file that we created, this one here. After we read that data, we store it in this JSON object. Then we need to create an array here that stores that JSON data, because remember, we need to return an array. That's why we created this one here. Then we store the JSON data as key value pairs. Okay, that's why we're creating a hash map here. We're calling this one hash map. Then we get the keys as a set and put them in this set called JSON object keys. And then we create this enhanced for loop to store that information into the hash map. So the key in the hash map will be the information that's coming from this set, and the value will be whatever matches that key in that set. So just to be clear, let me go back to this JSON object here. On the left, which are going to be our keys, and on the right are going to be the values. So when we're speaking of hash maps, remember that a hash map contains key value pairs. So in the hash map, we're saying our key is going to be input field, another key is going to be checkbox, and so on and so on. The value for each one of these keys is going to be hello for input field, 1 for checkbox, and so on and so on. So what this code is doing here is assigning those keys and those values and putting them together inside of this hash map. Lastly, we get that hash map and store it in this array, and we return that array. And now that we have that data being returned from this data provider, we can use this data in a test. So let's go ahead and write our test. Let's go to the sandbox test page right here. And we're going to scroll down. I already added a test right here. This is a new test submit form. So let's go ahead and begin writing this test. We're going to say form fields, because we need to go to the forms fields page. I'm going to say form fields is equal to sandbox page dot click form fields. Then I'm going to say form fields dot set input field text. Okay, so here we're trying to set this input field right here. And recall that in the past we would create a string and then we would reference the string here. But in our case, we're going to use the data that's coming from the data provider. So how we do this is as follows. Right here where it says add test, we're going to add some more information to this area right here. So we're going to say that there's a data provider in some class. We're going to say data provider class. And we're going to say data util dot class. Next we say data provider. It's equal to the name of our data provider, which is data provider 1. Okay, so here we're saying that our data provider class is this one right here, data utils. Again, this is the one that we just finished doing right here, data provider or data util. Okay. Then we're saying that the name of the data provider is this one, data provider 1. If we go back to this class, we see that the name of this method right here is called data provider 1. Okay, that's why we're using this name. All right, so we've told our test where the data is going to be coming from. And here we added this as well. Notice that these other methods that were written in the past do not contain any information in this parentheses. But in this case, we did add something here. We added hash map, and we're saying there's a string of hash maps that we're trying to read. Okay. Here we're saying where the data is located, and this is what we're using to receive that data. Now we can say something here as follows. We can say hash map dot get. Okay. So what are we trying to get? In our case, we want to read what this input field is going to have, right? So we're trying to read the input field information. So I'm just going to grab this right here, copy, and here I'm going to say input field. So when this line of code executes, it's going to go to this data provider, and it's going to retrieve the value for this input field. So it's going to retrieve this information right here, hello. Let's see what we need to do next. Then we need to select this checkbox. And we also need to select the radar button and all these other items. So we're going to add that. And here we're going to say dot select checkbox. And again, we're going to read the information from the JSON file. So we're going to say hash map dot get. In this case, it's just called checkbox. So let's copy this and put it here. And this will return this information right here, 1. Okay, let's go back here, and now we're going to say dot select radio button, and we're going to read that from the JSON file again. Hash map dot get, and it's called radio button, as we can see here. Let's put that in here. Let me go ahead and add the rest real quick. I went ahead and finished adding all the rest of the methods here. One for selecting from the dropdown, setting the email, setting a text, the message, and then clicking the submit button. Lastly, we're going to perform an assertion. If we go back to the website, when we submit this form, I'm just going to put something here. And click submit. We get this message here, message sent. So we're going to perform a validation to make sure that this message is being displayed. And in case you're wondering, I did go ahead and added these methods here to this class, this set email. I added these methods to this form fields page object. I said form fields, set email, set message, click submit button. I also added a new method called get confirmation message. So we're going to use this one here right now. We're going to say string confirmation message is equal to form fields dot get confirmation message, and we're going to assert true that the confirmation message contains message sent. Okay, so our test is finished and we're ready to run it. I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint right here where it says click submit so that we can see all of the fields that we've filled out. So let's go ahead and run this in debug mode. And we've hit the breakpoint, as we can see here. Notice that all the fields are being filled out. All of the information that was contained in that JSON file is being shown here. See hello, the option was selected, white was selected for the rated button, and all this other stuff as the email and the message that we're sending. And this is the information that we have here. Notice hello, 1, white, binary, all of this right here. So now we can finish running this test. And if you look at the results, we see that the test passed. Hopefully by now you have a good understanding on how to read data from a JSON file. So what I've shown you today was how to create some JSON file, and then how to create a class that would read that JSON file, and then how to use that information within our test. This can be very useful when you're trying to scale your test. You can just put all of your data into a file or different files and read that data as you need it. And it's very convenient because you can go in here and change this data to any other set of data that you want. You can create different files and so on. As always, please leave any questions in the comment section. This marks the end of the intermediate Selenium WebDriver video series. If you've been watching since the first video, congratulations for making it this far. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments or suggestions about this type of series. Please let me know in the comment section. I'll see you in the next video.